And the most important thing to do is to know and understand how the cider that you want to make and the choices that you make about the cider are going to impact the nature of your business.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Bringing us into episode 497 of Cider Chat and talking about the measure of how to approach the business of cider making was Eleanor Leger of Eden Specialty Ciders in Vermont. And what Eleanor was saying there was essentially the choices you make about how you want to make cider. And believe me, it's pretty broad, the options available to cider makers, such as using cultured yeast made by a lab, or leave your cider to ferment with only wild yeast. Or maybe you want to do a blend of both, a little bit of a wild ferment, then you add on some yeast, or maybe you're going to add on another yeast as you add something else to it. I mean, it's like the sky is a freaking limit when it comes to cider making and working with apples, because I've been saying this for 10 years on this here podcast. The apple is one of the most welcoming fruit in the kingdom of fruits. It truly is. It really is. And so she was touching upon it because it was part of a larger conversation that we are going to be enjoying on this here episode 497. Because we have dug into season 4 of a Cider Chat. And this is part of a count up to episode 500 of this here podcast, where I am revisiting past seasons and bringing back some episodes that I think you out there in Ciderville will really enjoy. And this episode here originally appeared in season 4 as 2 separate episodes. I had episode 174, part 1, and then I rolled out part 2 of the Q&A from the panel of professional cider makers in episode 175. And it was all recorded at CiderCon that year, which was held in Chicago. And now it's been combined, edited, and polished and presented here as one complete program so we could really dig into it and enjoy it. Now, you might want to bring your pencils out. You might want to stop the podcast midway, but do know that if you go to the Cider Chat YouTube channel, you can see the transcript there. And also, I have some very lengthy show notes with all the main bullet points at ciderchat.com. Just go in the search bar, beginning cider making tips, or if you remember this episode number, which is 497, you'll be there straight away. So we're going to be going to that featured conversation very shortly. But first, I have a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. We have a fun event coming up in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to be precise. And this is being hosted by the Laughing Palmier, and that would be David Lugo, who has done a number of these really cool events. And so he is someone you definitely want to follow on Instagram. I will have a link in the show notes. But check out this event. It's actually going to be taking place June 5th, which is a Friday. It's from 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. And it's super affordable for what you're going to get. It's called Hard Cider and Small Bites, Spring Edition at the Pearl Event Center. Now, I don't know what the Pearl Event Center is, but the name Pearl, you know it's got to be good. And so the write-up says that you're going to be able to enjoy a curated lineup of craft hard ciders from bright and crisp to floral and fruit forward, each thoughtfully paired with a seasonal small bite designed to highlight the fresh ingredients and vibrant flavors of spring. And then afterwards, you're invited to stay for a relaxed cider social hour, where featured ciders will be available by the glass and guests can mingle and revisit their favorites and continue the conversation. I mean, talk about a date night or a girls' night out or a friend's night out or whatever you want to call your night out. This sounds like a great deal. And coming around June, you know the weather's going to be beautiful and you just want to kind of get out and start socializing again. And what better person to like bring you in out from the cold and into happiness than somebody who goes by Laughing Pomelier. I mean, go David, we love you. And I happened to sit with David one night in Chicago at another CiderCon. Not this one. Well, I'd have to think about it. No, it was post this one. Jeez, I can't remember. So many CiderCons. Anyways, we spent the evening dining and hanging out, and it's just a super nice guy, super enthusiastic. Yeah, this is a win-win for everybody. Once again, it's going to be June 5th in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So glad to hear some good cider news coming out of Indiana. So put that in your calendar. And if you want the links, just go to the show notes for this here episode 497 at ciderchat.com. Cider Chat is listener supported. So whenever I hear from one of the patrons of Cider Chat, and actually David didn't reach out to me, I just happened to see it on social media, I like to talk about it. And that means that if you have some news out there and you want to share it, well, one way to do that is become a patron of Cider Chat. You know, you don't have to go at the commercial level. You could put in whatever you think it's worth your time, an hour every week, listening to this podcast for 500 episodes. If that's been worth your time, then we could kind of like work together to kind of help keep cider going up, because I can't do it alone. I mean, I'm producing this episode, doing the best I can, but I need your help out there too. So do check it out. Hit the donate button at Cider Chat or become a patron today. Speaking of which, if you do join at the Cider Chat Patreon page and you join as part of the Cider Going Up campaign, you could be on the list like these fine cider brands, such as Ross on Wye, Cider and Perry Company, based in Ross on Wye in the UK. Of course, if you don't know about Ross Cider and you haven't been on social media, then you're missing out, because they are a fabulous, fabulous brand. It's a family-owned cidery farm. They also have the Yew Tree Inn, which has a bucket list of ciders to be had there. They have a place that you could camp. They, of course, do the Ross Cider Fest every year, kind of like right at the end of August or so. And Albert Johnson will be our featured cider maker at one of the cider maker dinners coming up on the UK Cider Tour this April. We also have Duck Chicken Cider, which is based in London, and that would be James and Colleen. They are doing some delicious perry, dry perry in a can, and are bringing back this kind of neglected orchard in a very urban area. There is a episode with them. That's episode 205. We also have, going up to Canada, in British Columbia, we have Raven Moon. They are both a cidery, and they have wine and mead and cool people. That would be George and Marla. Love them. We also have Kanga Cider, who I mentioned last week, which is a Texas-based cidery and mead maker, slowly getting their engine going and starting to deliver some product. Beautiful Bent Ladder Cider and Wine in Doylestown, Ohio. Just a glorious, glorious estate cidery with some amazing brands and one of the most delicious Pommeau-style drinks around. Whew, yeah. You want to check out Bent Ladder if you're in the Ohio region. Of course, we have Press and Press is an online cider shop. That's Eric and Story delivering cider to your doorstep in the continental US of A. Also have the American Cider Association, which is an organization of cider and perry producers in the United States. Their mission is to grow a diverse and successful U.S. cider industry. And, when they're delivering CiderCon, they got it going on. We also have Oliver's Cider and Perry Company. Oliver's is based in Oaklepitcher, one of my favorite words to say. It's actually two words, and that is in Herefordshire in the West Country. So that's west of London. Locust Grove Cider and Brewery, that's in Milton, New York. So that's the west side of the Hudson River. It's a brewery, family-owned, old estate that is also making cider. So we're really happy for them. We also have, going back up to Canada, we have Heeman's Cellar. That's in Ontario. That's going to be the spot for the recent cider salon that just took place. And we'll be having an upcoming episode with Tom Heeman of Heeman's Cellar. Absolutely delicious ciders. We also have Esoterra Cider. They have just been cranking it out there. They built a new facility. They moved from Dolores, Colorado to Durango. And it's quite a setup that they have been just like churning away, like the wheel keeps on going. Really enterprising individuals, and you could feel the heart of who they are in all their social media. So beautiful people, be part of this campaign and join the crowd, because why not be in the in crowd and not out of the loop? Become part of the Cider Going Up campaign at ciderchat.com and the Patreon page.
Walking through the orchards, dancing in the street.
It's time now for our featured presentation, pre-recorded at CiderCon 2019 in Chicago. Next to the podium and myself was Marcus Robert. He is a fourth-generation farmer from the Yakima Valley of Washington State. So that's based in southern Washington. And he was on the podcast on episode 121 that was called Keeving Perry, Tieton Cider Works. Marcus is the operations manager at Tieton Cider Works. He's a longtime farmer, orchardist, and is also very involved in Fontaine Winery. So the dude has it going on there. He's also on the board of the United States Association of Cider Makers. Sitting next to Marcus is Tim Godfrey. Tim originally is from Michigan, but these days he is the head cider maker and director of production at Golden State Cider, based in Sebastopol, California. Next up, in the center of this panel was Eleanor Leger, a.k.a., in my mind, the queen of ice cider. Eleanor is the founder of Eden Specialty Ciders of Vermont. Eden was established in 2007 and is the leading producer of ice ciders and heritage ciders in the U.S. And certainly, again, the queen of ice cider. She is just like the go-to person for people to ask everything about that. Has helped so many people across the board. She's also served on the board of the United States Association of Cider Makers and was recently reelected to the board, so she's back on it. She's a member of the Vermont Working Landscape Enterprise Board and was the founder of Vermont Cider Makers Association. In addition to leading the team at Eden, Eleanor writes about the economics of cider production at cidernomics.com. You can listen to a podcast episode with Eleanor Leger by going to episode 111, Cidernomics, Breaking Bad or Breaking Even with Eleanor Leger. Also on the panel is Brent Myles from Clyde Cider Works. He was the original head cider maker at Seattle Cider Company and is most recently the head cider maker at Clyde Cider Works. And he's just launched Brown Hat, a cider consulting company. And we also had Ben Calvi. He's not only on the board of the United States Association of Cider Makers, he's a treasurer, but he's also the director of cider making for Vermont Hard Cider Company based in Middlebury, Vermont. So that is 5 cider makers and me hanging out, ready to rock and roll. I do want to say one of the things that happened, as I recall, was I was geared up to moderate and wanting to record it. And I started speaking. I did the whole introduction, and then I remembered, shoot, I didn't press my record button. So I was a little out of breath in the beginning, and then it slowly chilled out. And you probably wouldn't have known that, but I just have to, like, for posterity, put that piece out there. It was a little stressful when that happens to you. You're moderating and wearing many hats sometimes as a podcaster, but we got through it. And this is just a terrific conversation from some really great cider makers. And I want to say the audience too. And as you listen to this, I'm curious what has changed and what hasn't changed since then. You may notice some cideries that did open and are still around and some that aren't. So yeah, if you have it within you, do send your thoughts this way, or certainly when it gets posted up there on the different social media channels. What are you noticing? Does everything still hold true? And with that, we are going to move to this featured presentation with professional cider makers answering common questions at CiderCon 2019. A little bit of my roots going back to 1994 is when I first started teaching cider making at Cider Days. And I taught that for about 16 years. And through all that, a big question was, how do you describe cider? So I want to throw that out to the panel here, because that's a key thing when you're doing a commercial operation is how do you begin with that classic question? People come in, and that educational piece is, what is cider?
Very contentious question.
No,
Very
I'm not
contentious
shy.
question.
I'll answer it.
Okay, Eleanor's going for it.
A cider is the fermented fruit of apples.
Fermented fruit of apples.
Fermented juice of apples, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
It's like asking what is wine. It's huge and varied and whatever you want it to be. And the most important thing to do is to know and understand how the cider that you want to make and the choices that you make about the cider are going to impact the nature of your business.
Spot on. Now, so we know the classification cider. But looking back over your career, what you're doing now, if you could speak on, I wish I knew then what I know now.
That's actually something I talk
Marcus Robert.
about quite a bit to other cideries that are wanting to start up or thinking about it. And looking back, we started out as a small cidery. Our first year, we did a few hundred cases. We thought at that point, 11, 12 years ago, we thought if we sold 1,000 cases a year, that'd be fantastic. And we've definitely grown beyond that point. But looking back, we did a lot of capital investment into stainless steel and infrastructure and that sort of thing, and missed the boat on the marketing aspect. And that's really the biggest learning curve that you're going to have. You're going to learn how to make cider. Okay, and we can make a lot of cider, but to be able to sell it and understand the markets you need to get to sell that product, even if your business plan isn't to go with a distributor, understanding how just simple things like how to service an account correctly. Because I was talking to somebody the other day that said, I didn't realize I had to go to the account when I dropped off my keg and then go back and check on it and present them and say, I think you need a new keg. They don't even call me. The account doesn't even call me to say that they're out of cider. And so there's just a simple thing like that, understanding how to self-distribute, understanding how to talk to people, there's a huge learning curve there in the sales and marketing portion of it. And that's where the vast majority of your efforts should go to begin with, because really without that, you're just producing a very expensive hobby, and you maybe end up drinking a lot of the cider yourself. So.
Brent, Myles.
One thing that is not always apparent when you first get started and you're in the cellar banging your head against different problems is that most of the problems that you're going to face are not new or unique to you. And CiderCon is really great for, like Michelle was saying earlier, these 2 a.m. conversations where you realize that you aren't alone in trying to figure out why your cider isn't clarifying or whatever equipment problem you have. And so just to remember that, especially other people who are your size or used to be your size have seen and met a lot of the challenges that you're facing. And so just be humble and ask questions. And normally something that you maybe developed this weird workaround for, maybe that is the correct way to solve that problem, but maybe another cidery that you just have to ask the right question has found a better, more flexible way of solving it. So just don't get too siloed and don't think that these problems that are going to come up you're the first person that's happened to.
Great. It looks like we have our first question. And I really recommend, before you ask that question, and this is also true in the room, to make sure that you look at the people that are sitting next to you, introduce yourselves, because this is a network. You can make friends forever right now. So it'd be really great to know who you are, just where you're located.
My name is Eddie Gutierrez, and I work at St. Arnold Brewing Company in Houston, Texas. We are brand new to cider, and in fact, we're launching at the end of this month with about 10,000 gallons. I don't really have a history of making cider, so this is very scary for me. And my question is actually, from a QA/QC standpoint, the thought of residual sugar in a packaged product in beer is just a nightmare. And we use a centrifuge to remove any debris and yeast, and we're planning on aiming on the low end for sulfite additions. But does anybody have any experience in terms of rules of thumb to set yourself up for success and not end up with bombs in package?
Good question. Ben Calvi.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one all of us have probably faced at some point, having cider with residual sugar in the market, and then you get a phone call saying, I think it's fermenting. Either the bottle caps are popping off or the keg tastes a little funny. You want to do a few things. You have a few options. If you have residual sugar, you got to make sure that it doesn't ferment in the can or bottle or keg, and it will. So you either have to sterile filter. You want to go down to 0.45 micron, so read a good wine book. So you want to get it down to sterile filter so no yeast or bacteria can go through there. After that, you have a couple choices. You can pasteurize your product with heat after it's in the package, or you could use preservatives like sulfites and potassium sorbate. There's other things like DMDC or Velcorin. So there's different ways to preserve your product. You want to make sure you understand the science of each one of those. But yeah, if you're going to have residual sugar in your cider, don't send it to market without some sort of stabilization. The other thing you want to do if you have the resources is once you package something, you can plate it for micros. So we plate every 3 hours of production to make sure that what's in the package doesn't have any live micros. You probably don't have labs to do that, but for $50, maybe you send a representative sample to a lab like Enardis or ETS or something, and they'll plate it for you, and they'll tell you if there's anything still alive in there.
Yeah, so we actually have a PCR, so we can find out within 3 hours if there's anything living, and that's just the infrastructure that we had in place for beer. Our plan was to use sulfites, no sterile filtration, only a centrifuge, but I don't know if that's...
It's not enough.
To be extremely clear, sulfites are not a stabilizer, so they are not going to stop yeast re-fermentation. So yeah, you needed one of the 4 things that Ben talked about. You just need to pick one, and obviously know the reasons. But yeah, sterile filtration, Velcorin, pasteurization, or sorbate. But sulfite is not one of those stabilizers. So
yeah, I was going to say really quick, sometimes what I found when I started making cider years ago is that the tech I had influenced the type of cider I could make. As we've grown, we've been able to afford new tech, and that's made us able to make the cider that we really do want to make. But sometimes you have to design the cider to what you're able to do, and at that point, like to echo what people are saying, I think that it would be a challenge for sure to achieve any stability on that.
I'll just add sterile filtration. While it sounds great and often is more accessible for smaller producers, you have to be damn sure that between the filter and the package, you're also sterile. And frankly, you aren't. So while people say sterile filtration, for me, that's like theoretically possible, but practically don't do it. And then the issue with sorbate is it's good for a while, but it doesn't last forever. And you need, if you're in a fast turnaround situation where you're just putting stuff in kegs and it's going through to get the kegs back and it's not sitting out in the market for a month, you're fine. If you're doing bottles, 750 ml bottles that might go sit on a shelf for 6 months, it's probably not great. So the challenges for smaller producers around ciders with residual sugar are real and difficult.
One thing to think about your marketing, because I keep going back to marketing and sales, is that if you do utilize sorbates, most, if not all, natural markets will not buy your product because they will not sell products with potassium sorbate or any other sorbate in it.
Okay.
Even though wine has it, and they do sell this.
yeah, and some natural markets make exceptions for wine products, but like Whole Foods doesn't. So.
Yeah.
For wine.
But you have to label sorbates.
If you come find any of us after and pick us, the best thing to do is between seminars, walk up to someone and say, I have a follow-up question, I have more to do. Come grab one of us, and we can talk to you for 20 minutes. And there's a lot of options.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Bonus. We have somebody up at the microphone, so we're going to just go there. Sorry. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michelle Pagano. I work at a brewery in New York City called LIC Beer Project, but I've been gravitating towards the cider world more as a home brewer and cider maker. When you're getting ready to start the next step after your business plan, you've got the location, etc. In your experience, has it been more beneficial to do gypsy brewing versus taproom? I'm seeing the beer industry, they've been doing both, and it's been successful, but I just want to know from your point of view.
Just basically contract.
Right, contract, I'm sorry, to be
production.
clear, yes.
Yeah, we would say fermentation, not brewing, yeah.
Hence.
I like gypsy brewing, though. That's
So I think part of the question, the first answer to that question is how much money do you have? Because if you're constrained in resources, the most important thing is to get some product made someplace and get your brand on it and go out and start selling it. Like, the less money you spend before you actually start testing your product with customers, the better, because you just don't want to put a whole bunch of money in something and then 3 months later I'm out with my product and it doesn't work, you don't know what you're doing. It just, so that's my first recommendation. If you have lots of money, go ahead and spend it.
Yeah, because I've noticed in the beer world that there's been a struggle with those who have been doing contract brewing and then opening up a tap room. They just have a setback or it ends up failing completely. So you wouldn't see that's similar trend in the cider world?
I think in some ways cider is easier because you don't need to invest in a brew house and there's less people who are doing contract, and sometimes people's options are just limited. There's not a cidery near them that has excess capacity to ferment for them. And also the capital investment as opposed to beer is lower because you don't need a brew house, you don't need a boiler. And so I think it can be a good way to start, but you need to trust the contractor. And then Marcus has been saying you have to think about your marketing as well. Like, you're going to have to put on your label who produces it, and it's not you, and whether that is going to pay dividends down the line. Like, it might be easier to get started, but it's not really going to help you build a following if you're like, I don't really make this product.
It really depends on the story you're telling, though. So if you go down to a local winery and have partner with them, you say, hey, the story is I've partnered with this winery to help me produce the best ciders we could produce so I could bring cider to you. If you tell the story about that, consumers will think that's very, actually, quite quaint and neat, and
there's a
glom
difference
onto it.
that I think you're referring to, Marcus, which is cider is not beer. It's made from apples. And when you're talking about beer, it is all about the beer production process and the recipe and I'm the cook, I'm the chef. But cider is about apples. And if your story is about the apples, you can talk the fermentation and you want it to be done well and all that kind of stuff. But it depends what your marketing strategy is again. But there's a lot about apples that can be your story that is more important, frankly, than whose tank it was in.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. Great question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Ionov. I'm a cider maker from Moscow, Russia. And I have 3 questions to Eleanor about iCider.
Why don't we meet afterwards unless anybody else wants to know them?
Okay, I've been making cider for 3 years, and I wanted to do some experiments with iCider. And I suppose that I even used some of your guides about making iCider in small batch. And the most problem for me was to stabilize iCider, because I did several rackings, I add sulfides, and it seemed to be stabilized for some time, but in several months, no matter, it started to ferment in bottles. So this is the first question, if it's possible to stabilize it without sterile filtration. The second question is, which yeast strain you are considered as to be the best for iCider? And the third one, if cryo extraction is not possible and I have to use cryo concentration, it's impossible to, or it's a huge task to keep the juice in a fresh condition since it's pressed, for example, in November till the very freezing weather in January, as it happens in Russia, or even February. So if I use a freezer, am I cheating?
How many people are interested in iCider? Oh, good. Okay, cool. All right, I'll answer the questions. Usually it's one poor person and I'm like off in a corner. That's awesome. All right, so those are 3 great questions that I often get. Okay, let me do the yeast one first. You need a yeast that basically does the job you want it to do for iCider. So it's got to be comfortable getting started in a very high sugar juice. So that it needs to get going. You want it to have a pretty good kill factor so it gets rid of other stuff and it's just going on. And you want it to be temperature sensitive, because the way you're really going to stop the fermentation is through cold crashing the tank. And you need a yeast that just says, okay, I'm dying.
Okay.
Very gracefully. Other than that, most iCiders you're going to age a bit in the tank or in a barrel before you bottle them. Any impact, sort of flavor impact from a yeast, doesn't really, those sort of fresh fruity ester stuff don't survive over a long period of aging. So it doesn't really matter that much, except to the extent that your yeast, if it's not happy, is going to make off flavors that you want to avoid. So I would say pick any Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast, you'll be fine. Saccharomyces bianus, stay away from it because it's impossible to kill. So I don't know if you were using a champagne yeast, that would have been a problem. It's like it'll come back.
Yeah.
We talked about stabilization. There are 3 ways to get to stabilization, right? You can throw a ton of sulfites and all kinds of stuff at it. You can cross-flow filter and get everything out.
Okay.
Or you can what we do is just cold crash the tank. But again, you have to use a yeast that's temperature sensitive. So we bring the temperature, when you know you want to stop the fermentation, bring the temperature down to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, 30, around there.
And is it the way you usually do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a glycol chiller that we end up running 3 weeks out of the year when we're cold crashing ice cider fermentations.
Okay. So.
And rack it, keep it at that temperature, rack it, keep it at that temperature, and then we just let it gradually come back up to cellar temperature, and it's darn stable. We don't filter until just before it goes in the bottle. That could be 2 years. So it is pretty darn. It's a very tough environment for a yeast that's not acclimated to the environment to get in and start doing something. So the fact that yours isn't stable tells me that you didn't kill the yeast that was in your tank.
Okay.
It wasn't something coming in and getting something restarted. Because it's high alcohol, it's high sugar still, high acid.
Exactly.
Things don't get started. We've tried to take a thing of ice cider and get it going again, and it's like impossible. And your last, did I cover everything?
About freezing.
Cheating. Are you cheating? We do almost all of our ice cider through cryoconcentration outdoors because cryo extraction, because the cellulose in the apples breaks down when you freeze the apple, you start having decomposition happening in ways that really change the flavors. And we work with very interesting heirloom and unique apple varieties where we really want to preserve and showcase the aromas and the flavors of those apples. So cryoconcentration does that a lot better than cryo extraction does. We live in northern Vermont in Zone 3B at 1,400 feet elevation. We were able to put juice outside December 8th this year and have it be reliably below freezing. If you use a freezer, and only a freezer, yes, you're cheating. In this country, you would not supposedly be able to get a label that says ice cider. You can get a label that says iced cider, but not one that says ice cider. If you do end up using a freezer, what I often tell people is, if you can, take it out of the freezer, put it back in the freezer, take it out of the freezer, and put it back in the freezer. Because the advantage of outdoor natural cold weather concentration is actually the fluctuation up and down. We'll be minus 35 Fahrenheit to plus 20. It's a 55-degree temperature variation all below freezing, and it's that up and down that helps separate out all the sugars and the flavors that will trickle down to the bottom from the ice that will stay up at the top. If you just put it in a freezer, boom, it's frozen. A lot of that stuff is still trapped in the matrix of the ice, and you don't get it. So you get a lower yield, and you get less flavor.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Good luck.
Great. Why don't we just table ice cider for anything else later? Go back to the stuff.
Hi, folks. My name's Richie Roberts. I'm a winemaker from Fielding State Winery in Canada, and a fair-sized winery, and we've gotten into cider the last couple years. One of the biggest challenges we've faced in comparison to wine is settling juice prior to fermentation. Just wondering if you had any tips for that. What we've been doing is strictly using temperature, and we get a lot of issues in terms of freezing out water, which we don't normally get in juice for grapes. In terms of flotation or enzymes or any turbidity goals that you're looking for.
Do you know what percent solids you're bringing in?
No, actually I don't. Yeah. No, in terms of like sugar, they're normally between 11.5 to 13 bricks.
And when we press, we bring in a lot of the juice that we end up having is somewhere between 2 and 3% solids. It's a little heavy for what we're trying to accomplish. So we experiment with flotation. There's a lot of success there. We incorporated a centrifuge into our process at one point, so we can do a quick pass if we get something that is pretty heavy. But yeah, generally we're trying to get to like 0.5% solids is where we see a really positive impact on our product. Cold settling is hard because you get this, like, by the time you're in the last third of the tank, it's just one continuous, like, getting worse and worse, and you end up taking big losses, and then that kind of hurts your margin. So if you have any ability to do any mechanical separation, I think that's what I'd recommend for sure.
Yeah, if you don't know your percent solids, you can get a little tabletop centrifuge and you spin down your tubes and figure out how much solids in there. It could be your choice of apples. Some are really high, like early season in Vermont, there's Paula Reds, 10% solids. And if you try to ferment with something like that, you're going to struggle. We just use enzymes, and after a few days at cold temperature, it's the suspended solids drop out, generally speaking.
Okay, great, thanks.
Great.
Hi, I'm Marcus. I'm from Canada as well. I have a cidery up there. Just wondering, we're pretty new and pretty small, so I've heard or seen on the internet some people will use plastic instead of stainless steel in fermentation or storage. Just wondering your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's cheap and totally fine to use, like IBCs or flex tanks. The only problem ends up being temperature control, which is very important. And some of the, I can't remember the brand, but there's some that have a no glycol cooling system that you can buy. But in terms of the actual like material, it's totally fine to use, and a lot of cider makers do that. But I would just caution, don't just, unless it's really cold ambient temperature, you are going to get a lot of heat spikes from the exothermic part of the fermentation. And so just whatever you can do if you're ambient fermenting in an IBC. If you have a walk-in, sometimes I'll start it at ambient, bring it to the walk-in overnight, and it cools it down, and then I pull it back out, and to keep it as steady as you can. But it's hard to get consistent product unless you're doing the temperature control. But
thank you.
Another comment I would add is just make sure your sanitation's really good. The totes are a wonderful, cheap way to ferment, but it's hard to clean the top corners after you ferment. So invest in some good yoga classes and also some brushes and things, and adapt a few ways so you can do CIPs with pumps and stuff. So get creative about really making sure you clean the plastic. Otherwise, it's a great, affordable way to start.
And the last thing is not good for storage. Like fermentation's fine, but you don't want to store cider in them.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Sussman. I'm with Cold Spring Cider Works in Cold Spring, New York, on the Hudson River. We're just starting out, and so this is a general question. I used to make wine. They said the way to make a small fortune in the wine business is to start with a large fortune. So I'm wondering in cider, can you make money? Is it profitable? And is there an ideal point? Is there an ideal amount of production or something that you say, you're going to struggle until you hit this point, and then maybe there's a sweet spot? I don't know, but I'm just asking the question.
So I write a blog, or at least I used to, I haven't done it in a while, called Cidernomics, which is all the sort of analysis you need to think about to answer those questions for yourself based on where you're located and what your apple sources are and what kind of cider you want to make. Because all three of those things really impact the answers to those questions. There's no blanket answer.
It really depends on what you want your business to be. Most of the time I'm talking to people wanting to start up a business, and they're already talking with distributors and trying to sign contracts, and before they even really have a product made. And at the end of the day, most of my tips are basically stay as small as possible for as long as possible. If you think you're going to sign up a distributor and conquer the world, it doesn't really happen that way. You're putting in, if you have a distributor or you sign up a distributor, you're signing a contract to do more work yourself, because you're still going to be the salesperson. You're not there. They are a warehouse that happens to have delivery trucks at the end of the day, and they will service accounts the way they're supposed to be serviced. But distributors have thousands of SKUs of products, and their salespeople on the street sell usually the top 10 products in that book, because they're trying to bring home money to their family on incentive, unless for somehow your little company can get on their incentive sheets. So it's very complex, and a lot of cideries get to the point where they sign up with a distributor, they start selling some volume. Then it becomes a vicious cycle of, if I sell more volume to make up for the margin that I give the distributor, then I have to buy more, I have to do more CapEx, and I have to go to the bank to get another loan to do more CapEx, and then I got to sell more cider, and then it keeps rotating that way. And you get to a point, when you get to about, let's say, a medium-sized cider is a scary point, because you're giving up a lot of margin to the distributor, you're having to produce more volume, you're having to buy more equipment to be more efficient or produce more cider, and that's where a lot of cideries fail, breweries fail, wineries fail, is that medium size. because they can't
what do you
quite get
consider
to the
medium?
point. What's that? They can't quite get to the point where their EBITDA is positive, and the bank doesn't like seeing a negative EBITDA let's say a balance sheet for very long before they go, you got to get this thing positive or we have to call your nose. Staying as small as possible for as long as possible. If you want to if you have a good retail location, make your retail location sell as much of your product as possible to get the full retail for it. Start up other retail locations. Sell as much of the product as you can yourself to retail. And that's...
Which speaks to location.
Yeah. And we, as Tieton Ciderworks, we've never had a really good location. We still sell a lot of product out of our door, but we're heavily entrenched in distribution, and I understand that world a lot better now. Yeah, you'll make a fine, if you do it right, you'll make a fine living staying small. But if you're going out trying to conquer the world with a brand and having it sold to Coors or Budweiser or Heineken or somebody else, that's also a very hard thing to do. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you very much.
One more comment from Ben.
So advice I got when I started making wine was don't learn how to do it with your own money. It's go get a job for somebody. I love the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans and small business owners, but if you've never worked in the trade at all, go work at a tap room, at a bar room, for a distributor, go work for a cider maker. Learn everything you need to know with someone else paying you, because they're worrying about the business decisions. Once you have that knowledge and you think, okay, I want to take all this skill and expertise that I've got for the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, then start your company. That would be my advice.
My name's Kyle. I'm a home cider maker, cider enthusiast. I've been making cider for about 3 years. And eventually, I would like to have a small retail location. That's like the end game for me. I don't want to get too big. With that in mind, if I were going to do this, I would make cider that I think is good, that other people give good feedback on. What is like an ideal number of different cider styles to have starting out? Like, I would make a dry tannic cider, and I would love that, and I would want everyone to love it. But I understand that not everybody loves that. So I recognize the importance of having other styles, a little sweeter, or maybe something with a fruit component. So do you have a recommendation on, do you have 3, 4 core ciders, or do you go for 8, or is there a magic number, or not really?
Good question.
We have 4 core ciders, and then we have a few different other series that we do. This is how we do it. We have 4 core ciders, and we have 2 series. We have a limited release series, and we also have a single varietal series, and that gives our customer a sense of what's new coming out in the market, because the thing is, you don't want too much at one time because you confuse the consumer. They've had studies, let's say studies in Costco where they put out 20 different jams, and you taste 20 different jams and you walk away with none of them because you can't remember which one was the best. And then they've had studies, they compare that to studies with 4 jams, and they taste 4 jams, they buy something like 60% more jam if you have less choices. Altogether, we produce like 14 different varieties of cider, maybe more. I don't remember what the count is now. But we really focus our sales on 4 core items and a couple limited releases throughout the year. That's our model.
Cool. Great question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's wise that you already realize that the cider you like might not be the cider that you need to sell. I found that out as well, and it's frustrating, but it's the reality. If you make one cider, you'll probably attract 10% of the people that might want to drink it. We try to do as much diversity as we can with our ciders. We're similar. We have 4 core, and then we have a couple series that highlight different things that we think are interesting people would like to try, but having a variety, especially as you start out, is super important.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really interesting that you mentioned that too, because having a core line, I think that makes sense because especially as a small maker with limited resources, I'm not spreading myself too thin, trying to do too much crazy stuff and have 12 different ciders and whatever. That's good input too. Thank you.
And I think on the retail side, in distribution, it's really important to have kind of a curated set of 4 or 5 or 3. But on the retail side, I think what you want to balance is consistency, so people can come back and taste what they liked last time with newness and spice. And so you want people who it's their second time in and they want to try the new thing. Or so at Clyde Cider Works, what we've been doing is we have 10 taps, 5 of them are core, and then the other 5 are. So one is like a reserve series, or 2 taps are like a reserve series, and 3 are monthly rotating.
Okay.
So we do a kind of monthly release of new flavored ciders.
Okay.
And it's also dependent on the variables that you have to work with. So if you are just buying juice, you can't do much with different apples except for maybe a couple of times a year. So you're dealing with different sweetness levels or acid levels or adding different flavors. And so don't forget that, what a lot of people like these days are flavored ciders, and you can have a really good base and make basically unlimited number of ciders from that base if you want to. But I just would, so I think on the retail side, you have a bit more flexibility to go a bit wider, but you do still want people to come back and try the thing that they liked last time so that they're not always like getting confronted with these new flavors. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So I'm also just starting out, and I've been really struggling with location-based questions. Right now I've been making cider on a family farm in the middle of pretty much nowhere. And I understand from the community that having a taste room is where you can make most of your sales. But how important is it to locate your tasting room where you're actually making your product? Or how do you balance urban versus bucolic experience? And has anybody ever tried both, having tasting rooms in both types of environments? I don't know if anybody has any advice about that.
People want to come see Willy Wonka Land, and they want to see where the stuff is made. But the truth of the matter is, you really need a good retail location where there's good traffic, because we did the same thing. We were literally out at the end of the road, out of a community that has 1,100, maybe 700 people in it, and no one ever visited. We got 2 people a week on average. That did not sell any retail where our highest margin is. And so if you're trying to build a business, then you have to recruit customers with the lowest price per head possible. Trying to drag people out to a farm, which maybe you have a Disneyland of a farm out there, and you have kids crawling on trees, and you have mazes and pumpkin patches and that sort of thing. That's great. You get a lot of customers that way. But most traditional farms like mine, we don't do U-pick, we don't do those things, so people literally had to find us somehow. And I think when people come out, they want to see how it's made and look at it. That's fine. But to actually to sell as much retail as possible, it takes a lot of effort and time and money to get people out to your farm that has no other reason to come out to, rather than bringing the cider to them where they live. So that's my 2 cents on it. Someone else may have something.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective. So part of it is how close are you to a major city? Because if you were easy driving distance to a major population center, I would say don't open a retail center, just self-distribute. Okay. And use your place for events, for trade and press from your market. So you got focused occasions when people can come, or maybe just have something that's only open on Saturdays or by appointment. But retail location in an urban environment is expensive rent, expensive staff. Yep. It's a whole. Now you're in the retail business. Yep. Now you're in the bar business. When you're trying to really focus on your cidery. Actually, we're struggling this right now. Like, we've opened this taproom in Winooski, and we're like, do we want to be in the restaurant business? Does that make sense for us? We're small, and it's far away from us. And so if you can self-distribute to a pretty major metropolitan area, I think that is a way of staying small. You're giving up the retail margin, but you don't have a distributor that you're dealing with. So you're getting a good price. And you may need to have somebody who's willing to drive stuff around for you when you're right in the middle of a fermentation. Yeah. But I would look at that as an option too.
Do you have any sort of brackets on what that distance might be?
We're 3 hours away from metro area.
Okay.
No one comes and visits us.
Yeah, I'm 2 hours away from the biggest town, which is 42,000 people. So that doesn't work either.
Okay.
I think don't forget that a retail location doesn't have to be a big thing. Like, you can buy a kegerator and have 4 taps and be open on the weekends or days that you're there anyways, and capture some of that margin without spending a lot of money building out a huge tap room. Like it can just exist in your space that you already have, and you can capture some of that.
Thanks.
Hi, it's me again, Michelle from New York. My question, I took a seminar at last CiderCon about the different avenues of raising funding for opening up the business. And one of them was crowdfunding, another one was finding investors. But they were great ideas, great tools, but I didn't really get any feedback of what really worked and why. And I thought maybe quickly you can maybe share some insight on that and then help everyone make a decision on their own.
Life is better when you don't borrow money, but that's not super available to everybody. I can say that I started making cider out of IBC totes and milk tanks with little baby pumps, and that's how we made it happen. So we weren't borrowing money. I can't really speak towards crowdfunding because we just tried to keep everything organic as possible, but that's always when people are coming to me and they say, how am I going to afford this? You don't have to have your dream cidery when you open. You can start super, super low and grow there. And there's a lot of, I would imagine most people sitting here with me made cider in totes at some point, and that's how they got started. That's my feedback.
Thank you.
Keep your day job.
Always, right?
I'm really serious. I think like a really viable small cidery model is you have a day job. This is your passion. You do it on the evenings, on weekends, as a way of getting started. And then if it looks like it's going to go somewhere, that's awesome. But if it doesn't, you haven't killed yourself and bankrupted your home, mortgaged your home, whatever.
How about Kickstarter? I've seen like it work in the beer world. Again, I understand it's a different world, but I've seen a lot of breweries in my neighborhood like Kickstarter and whatever the other ones were, and they've at least gave them a step in the right direction.
I think Kickstarter's hard for a new company because I don't think you can actually provide. I think I've seen Kickstarter mostly used by existing cideries to do like taproom renovation instead of raising the funding for their business to start, because in the taproom model you can say, oh, we're going to give you this merch or whatever, and I don't actually know if you can kickstart like alcohol production through their site. I'm not actually sure about that, but I've seen it mostly like RevNats did it to fund like a taproom expansion, things like that.
Okay.
I don't think any of us can advise you on that, and you should go look at Kickstarter and find some people who did it and talk to them.
Thank you.
But that's like part of the research to do is pick up the phone and
you
call.
got it. Thank you.
Howdy, folks. My name's Christian. I'm with Duluth Cider. We just started out like 3 months ago. We're fermenting in totes, conditioning in 15-barrel stainless jacketed bright tanks. Pretty small. We're looking to do some expansion. And I just had a question about lab equipment and what you find is like the most crucial piece of lab equipment that you find helps improve your product without dropping a ton of money. To paint a little more picture, I've got like I think it's an SA 100 Vinmetrica like sulfite meter and a scale and a wine thief, and that's about it. So any advice on expanding my lab? And yeah.
Hydrometer and a
we got a hydrometer.
We got a thermometer.
Yep, yeah.
Anything
I
else?
think you basically have what you need. Everything else you're going to be looking at. If you want a base piece of automated equipment, it's going to be starting at $50,000.
Yeah.
If you want something that you can put samples in and plug in, you're going to spend a lot less money just sending samples out to ETS labs. If you want something done. Yeah.
I think you want to measure your basic chemistries. Temperature, pH, get a benchtop pH meter. If you can't afford that, get pH strips. You want to measure acidity, titration equipment. Very simple. You want to measure sulfites. You can get those kits. They're very cheap kits, but find a way to measure sulfites. And eventually you want to measure alcohol and CO2. So alcohol, you can get a biliometer from a yard sale probably somewhere, or you send something out to a lab. I don't know. Those are the basic chemistries I measure every day.
Sweet.
Those basic 5 chemistries.
Yeah, awesome.
Great. Good luck.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Joe Ferrier, and I'm from Ficklewood. We aren't open yet, but we're looking to open in the summer. In fact, I'm getting pictures from our contractor of concrete saws and scaffolding, so it's interesting. We're in Long Beach, California, which is just right to the line. We're at the end of LA County, right where Orange County starts, if anybody didn't know where that is. But yeah, so my questions, I actually had 2 questions that it's all equipment related. So one, I wanted to see if anybody had any practical experience that they could share on filtration lenticular, cross-flow, what preferences are. And the other is experience that any of you have had with using hopback systems or similar to systems with things other than and including hops. So for botanicals and things like that. Yeah.
For filtration, depending on your size, if you want to be moderately grow, you'll need to get cross-flow at some point. For smaller operations, I don't like recommending a lenticular unless you know how your cider filters. And so to know that and know the micron sizes of the pads or membranes that you're going to use, you would need to start with plate and frame, which is a great low-cost option. You do need to, unless you're going to do a couple passes with different coarseness, you'll need to probably do some clarification or settling depending on your turnaround time. But so I like to recommend starting with a plate and frame if you want filtration, and then basically skipping lenticular and moving to cross-flow at some point. The cross-flow just aids a lot in your turnaround time. You can go straight from the fermenter to the bright tank, and you're going to just recoup a lot of the losses that you'll see from the multiple rackings and tank movements that you need for the plate and frame.
Can you just add how much a cross-flow filter costs these days?
They range, but for a good one, it's like $100,000. And
just for filtering.
Yeah. But if I had to just do everything in totes and have one piece of equipment, I would choose a cross-flow filter.
You can find DE filters really cheap right now. A lot of people are moving up, so there's some small units that are available. I see them all the time. You can DE filter to diatomaceous earth filter over to a pad filter is something that we've done in the past. It's a nice cheap option too before you get to cross-flow.
Okay. I think it's like a small 2-element cross-flow. You can find some of the less expensive models for around $30,000. They'll do, you're not going to do 6,000 gallons a day with it, more like 1,000 gallons a day. But there's that. The prices of plate and frames that you'll start with are usually between $6,000 and $10,000 for a small one, kind of thing. Because anything that's made out of stainless steel is not moderately priced. It's always at the top end. Yeah.
Any of you guys use the hopback, the second question? Or some kind of extraction?
Yeah, we use a hopback. We found it. We actually built our first one. It was super sketchy. But from there are some commercially available options there. I like it because it's super clean, and it's way easier than digging out tanks or anything if you're dry hopping or you're making any sort of added, like adjunct adds or something. Like if you use ginger, digging ginger out of a tank is frustrating, but trying to filter it is even more frustrating. So there are some commercially available options out there. Cool. And they're awesome.
Thank you.
Great.
I like using the mesh hot bags from BSG or wherever, and basically just throwing them in the fermenter. If you're getting custom fermenters made, you can have them put hooks on the inside of the manway doors. You can then hook the bags to those, so you're not actually having to dig anything out. Or if you're buying wine tanks that have outswing manway doors, those are really easy on slope bottom tanks. But then it keeps it contained. You get a lot of contact time. It does affect your process because you're doing separate batches as opposed to making a base cider and adding flavoring later. So it's dependent on a lot of things, but that's my preferred method.
One more question.
Hi there, my name's Giff. I'm from New Hampshire. I have a small on-farm cidery for our local pick-your-own-fruit farm that we run. Fermentation temperatures. Someone brought up a fermentation spike. First question is, what constitutes a spike? Is it 2 degrees? Is it 10 degrees in fermentation temperature? And second, there's always the temperature range on any cultured yeast. Do you guys ride the lower end of that range? Do you ride the higher end? Where have you found your best fermentation temperatures?
Low and slow. So usually whatever yeast you choose to ride the lower end of it, that's where cider aromatics are pretty delicate. They blow off really easily. So we try to keep it low and cold. We have on a jacketed tank, we usually set a differential of 2 degrees. So that's clicking on if it hits 2 degrees above or below what it was set at. Tank design is important too. If you have a big boxy tank, that means in the middle of that tank it's a lot warmer than where your temperature probe is on the edge. So some of that involves tank design, and we talked about totes quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but we talked about totes a little bit, and you have no power over that with the tote. They do make some cool things. You just hook up to glycol and you just stick them in there, and it's like a little plate. But still, then you're trying to take samples and keep your temperature, and that also requires someone being there like all the time. So yeah, low and slow, and get nice narrow tanks.
Got it. If you don't want to be at 80, 95 degrees, then your yeast will get really unhappy. So by low, we mean 60, or some people go in the 50s. So do your fermentations either in a controlled temperature environment or wait till the winter. If you have a cold room at your farm, maybe do it in some there. If you can afford glycol and keep the fermenter at a certain temperature, that's the best.
I would pick up on what you said about just setting it for a 2-degree differential. If you're a beginning cider maker, I can't recommend more strongly measure every 1 or 2 days during your fermentation. So, just what your starting specific gravity is and watch it and track it. And you learn so much about fermentation dynamics by just watching what your patterns are with different yeasts or different fermentation, and you're measuring the temperature as well as the drop. Just being at one temperature doesn't mean that your fermentation is going at one rate, right? So you're naturally going to have a lot more activity early on, and then it's going to taper off. And we really find that we're trying to lower temperature at the beginning, and we're actually starting to raise it at the end. And a happy yeast fermentation is usually somewhere between 1 to 4 points of specific gravity drop a day. And if you're getting out of those bounds, you're getting too slow or too fast.
So when you say 1 to 4 points right on the specific gravity scale, correct?
1.001 to 1.004.
Okay,
the
got it.
There. Yeah.
I'm with you. All right, thank you.
I'm sad to say we have reached the time limit for this seminar this morning. I just want to reintroduce Ben Calvi. We have Brent Myles, Eleanor Leger, Tim Godfrey, Marcus Roberts. They're all going to be willing to chit-chat with you, whether right after this or at some other point. And just an ending thought, all the information you got, you're also following your bliss. So keep the heart of cider in that mind, too. It's a worthy endeavor, and these kind of opportunities to talk, we probably could do this all day, so I hope we get to do it again at future CiderCons. Go to ciderchat.com to find the show notes for this year episode 496 of a Cider Chat. Make sure to hit the follow button before you sign off from this here channel, because you don't want to miss another Cider Chat. Coming up next week, we have a doozy. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.